Hey guys, what is happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph, and today I've got Tom Habib on from the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and he is originally from Ontario. He grew up like not really hunting and fishing and that kind of stuff, but he grew up canoeing and hiking and a little bit of fishing and spending lots of time in the outdoors. And he came to Edmonton about 10 years ago. He got his master's degree in ecology. And yeah, now he's the treasurer for the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is a nonprofit organization that is bringing awareness to hunting and angling issues and trying to get people out doing it, trying to get people out enjoying it and you know, conserving that future of this recreation and making sure that those values continue into the future generations. So yeah, he came on and I wanted to just get a feeler for why is hunting and angling important? Why should people care? Why should people want hunters and anglers out there even if they don't do it, right? So why should they be supportive of it, or if not supportive, at least neutral and understand the issue? And we got into what the Backcountry Hunters and Angler is, got into what else? All kinds of different stuff. Some of the current issues that the BHA is trying to work towards. They only started their new chapter in Alberta a year ago. But yeah, they're getting some good traction, it sounds like, and yeah, I wish them all the best in the future because I really support what they're trying to do. We talked about the concept of fair chase regarding to hunting. We talked about some of the areas in Alberta that recently or will be recently turned into wilderness areas, and a little bit of the issues around there. But that's a whole other bag of worms. Yeah, all kinds of different stuff. Why hunting and angling is important, why it should be important, and it was really, really good. We talked about chronic wasting disease a little bit too. He did his thesis on chronic wasting disease, and he's hoping to hook me up with somebody that can maybe speak a little more to that in the future. That'll be awesome. So, yeah, like I said, I hope you guys like this episode. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it, and I could have done like 10 hours of this because we could have gotten to more specific of every 10-minute piece could have been turned into an hour, but in the future podcast eventually. So awesome. Yeah, as for sponsors, just the normal three: Greenlink Forestry, doing resource inventory analysis in the province. Like I said before, they're basically just first line in forest management, making sure that those managing the forest know exactly what is out there and how to manage it. And then Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. I really appreciate their support. Without their support, it'd be hard for me to justify continuing to do this. So I really appreciate everything that they've done for me. And also, Damage Timber. Damage Timber is an apparel company out of Edmonton here, and they're trying to support conservation and environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. So they're taking 10% of all their revenue from the sale of their clothing and putting it towards a scholarship for environmental sciences. In the first one's going out this fall, 2018. So you can apply for that, I guess, on their website. And yeah, they have awesome hats and toques and shirts, and they got hoodies, getting water bottles, all kinds of awesome stuff. So really check them out. They're great. And yeah, if you punch in Your Forest 10 at checkout, you get 10% off everything. Even if there is additional sales, you get 10% off of that as well. So yeah, definitely check them out. So yeah, without any further screwing around, here is myself and Tom from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Hope you guys like it. So yeah, you're saying you're from Ontario.
Yes.
And what got you into like hunting and angling and that kind of stuff?
That was a newer development. I only started hunting after I'd been in Alberta for 5 years or so.
Okay.
So I started hunting when I was 28 or so. So yeah, like 7-8 years now. Always interested in wildlife, outdoors, all that kind of thing. I went, canoe camping when I was a kid, like every good Ontario boy and all that kind of thing. But hunting was totally off my radar. I grew up in the city, didn't know anyone who hunted. Friend of a friend of a friend of my parents kind of thing. That was as close as I had a connection to hunting.
Everybody knows somebody down the line somewhere,
right.
But whether or not you want to hang out with them.
Well, yeah, there was no real connection there. Having a hunting mentor is a really easy way to get into it, and it's tough without it. And I just didn't even have an interest in it. It was just totally foreign to me. Fishing, yeah, we had a cottage up on a lake, and we went fishing for smallmouth bass all the time. But, nothing too hardcore. Moved out to Alberta to do a master's degree in wildlife biology on chronic wasting disease. And in the department at the U of A Biological Sciences department, like every prof there hunts, and it was just, that was unexpected. I didn't really think that was I didn't really see how the two fit together really well, hunting and wildlife ecology and that kind of thing. But, pretty soon I realized, they can coexist very, very easily.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of me not really, ever being exposed to that.
Yep.
So yeah, a few of my friends were into hunting and they kind of dragged me out eventually and,
Nice.
put a rifle in my hands and that was it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That was it. Just after that, you're hooked probably, I'm sure, right? I've yet to run into somebody who's done it right? Like not talking about like jumping in a truck and going driving for whitetails or something, but like actually been out and been able to enjoy it once and not wanting to do it again, right? Like,
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a very different type of outdoor activity than anything else. I've done tons of hiking, backpacking, canoeing, all that stuff. But it really forces you to slow down and then slow down and then slow down some more. And you pay so much closer attention. And I was one of my favorite things about hunting that I never really experienced with other outdoor activities is you find a nice tree to sit under that's got some, game trails nearby. You sit down and after 5, 10, 15 minutes, everything kind of starts coming back to life. You don't really realize how much of the, little birds and squirrels and whatever you're disturbing. And once you kind of been there for a little while, it just seems like, oh, then this is what the woods are actually like. And
totally.
I've never really got that appreciation until I slowed down to the point that, you'd be able to see a deer without it spooking first.
Yeah, no, for sure. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's funny how it does like 5 minutes is all it really takes for all those little creatures to start coming back in. Like I've had situations where you jump in the tree stand and 5 minutes later you can see the buck that was bedded down 200 yards away stand up and he's like, okay, whatever that was is gone, and comes walking in, right? Like
totally.
It's interesting, but it's funny trying to make that connection between like conservation and hunting and angling, right? Like they think it's really simple to be like, well, obviously if you're removing like things from the land base, right? How could that possibly be conservation? And making that connection for people is really it's a weird concept, right? Like it's not very intuitive.
Totally. It's the disconnect between what's good for the individual animal. No, hunting's not great for an individual deer that I shot. But for the population,
strangely,
it's individual versus population level. And at the population level, you're taking away a handful of animals that are going to be replaced, within a year. Mm-hmm. And it gets, people engaged in the landscape. It gets people caring about the wildlife and they have an incentive to keep those critters around for the long term.
Yeah.
But again, it's this disconnect. It's an individual animal. No, it's not good for an individual animal.
No.
But for the population and the long-term persistence of that population, it can be a really valuable tool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. It's funny, one thing that you mentioned about slowing down and slowing down and slowing down, right? I find one of the weirdest skills that like hunters have that people otherwise don't recognize. Even somebody like I've taken my friends out hunting who are like avid outdoorsmen. They're out there hiking and climbing and canoeing and doing everything, right? And it's just walking quietly.
Yeah.
Like literally not.
I'm still working on that.
It's so hard.
It is.
It's hard. Like you think you just walk through the bush, but like first of all, you have to watch for sticks, watching for like all kinds of whatever, right? And then, but also even just the way you plant your foot or the way you rubbing your legs together and like all that kind of stuff. It sounds so stupid. Like anybody listening that doesn't hunt, they're not going to get this. They're going to go like, these guys are idiots. They're talking about walking being difficult, but like, yeah, it is. It's a challenge because you realize after a while that, yeah, it's definitely a skill you learn, but little things like that. But yeah, that's cool. So you started off in Ontario. You were doing like lots of hiking and stuff like that. You said and you were fishing a little bit, and
yeah, in terms of like outdoor recreation, yeah, fishing was never a huge part after, when I was a younger kid and stuff. Did that a lot. Didn't really stick with it too much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like canoeing and hiking were sort of the main kind of outdoor things that I did. It's
funny how hiking kind of becomes boring after you realize that you can go hiking with a rifle.
Totally. Yeah. Off the trail. Like we can't go off the trail. The trails are there for a reason. Better stay on it. And it's like, well, no, you can get off. And as long as you're,
got a
not ripping through sensitive areas and stuff. Yeah. A compass and a map or GPS or an iPhone, whatever you have now.
Yeah.
And you see different areas. You experience it differently. And the other thing is I get it at different times a year. I never would have gone hiking in November before. Like that's not really a high season for that kind of thing. So you get a totally different outdoor experience.
Yeah. No, it's huge. And that's what I try to get across to people when I'm like, oh, do you like hiking? I'm like, kind of. Like, yeah, I do. Like I like being out in the bush and hiking and doing miles and miles and miles. And like I do that all the time. But I'm not hiking the way you are. Like I'm definitely trying to achieve something, right? I'm trying to find like a good fishing spot, or I'm trying
Yeah.
to, or I'm hunting or whatever. And like it definitely brings a whole new level of appreciation and like, and understanding. Like you were saying, if you stop and wait 5 minutes, all of a sudden things come back to life, and it actually is more like nature, right? Rather than just being a bunch of trees are going by. You don't see the squirrels or the birds or all that stuff. But yeah, that's cool. So I guess we should explain. You said your background was in ecology. You said, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did a degree at Guelph in Ontario, Southern Ontario, on wildlife biology and zoology. Came out here and was working on chronic wasting disease. My field work was out near just past Wainwright, right along the Saskatchewan border. One of the first areas where chronic wasting disease was where it first came into Alberta. Yeah. And it's since spread a lot more up and down. That whole eastern section is pushing west closer and closer to the city now.
Yeah. So my understanding, like maybe we should explain chronic wasting disease a little bit, because even I don't really quite. Yeah. I'll let you do that.
Okay, it's a prion disease. So diseases are caused by usually bacteria, which are fairly large cells in the disease world, or viruses like the cold virus or the flu virus, which are much, much smaller. They're not much more than DNA with a protein shell around it. Right. And then a prion is just a protein. That's all it is. It's not. There's no DNA. It's not alive in any meaningful sense. It's just this little protein that there's a normal version of the prion protein, and then the infectious one. The normal one is in any any mammal, maybe any animal at all. I'm not sure about that. Okay. In all through your brain, nervous tissue, etc. And then if this infectious one comes in contact with it, it's just a slightly misfolded version of that normal protein, and then it comes in contact with the normal one, and it turns it into one of its own. So it's like a zombie protein that goes around converting normal proteins into zombie proteins until your brain looks like a sponge. So other prion diseases, mad cow disease is the most well-known one probably. Right. The human version of that is CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. That's a mouthful. There's a few others out there. Those are the kind of more well-known ones. And then CWD is one of the only free-ranging ones in wild animals, and it's kind of all throughout different pockets throughout North America now. Mostly in white-tailed deer and mule deer, but also in elk in some areas. And I think it's been discovered in moose as well, in just a handful of cases.
Moose now?
Just a couple, I think, right now, but yeah.
So how does deer and how do ungulates pick this up?
So it's animal to animal contact. It's, when an animal reaches like sort of the end stage of the disease and they're really, really sick and they do have that wasted appearance and they're drooling and their head is down, they're shedding infectious material, from all their bodily fluids pretty much. And they can probably shed even before they reach that end stage. But, is it nose to nose contact at, like, a bale of hay or something, or in places that allow, baiting and have, bait piles out there for hunting purposes. Yeah. That could be a feature that brings a lot of different animals together in the same place at the same time. The other thing about prion diseases, which makes them super duper scary, is it doesn't need to actually be transmitted directly from animal to animal. It can, because it's this protein, it's not alive in any meaningful way. It doesn't just die if it's out on, on the surface of the ground. It can live there and live. It can still remain infectious for years or even a decade or more in the environment. So, deer number one could come in, eat a bunch of food at a hay bale, leave its infectious material behind. 2 weeks later, another deer comes by and can pick it up. I don't know if that's more or less likely to lead to infection than direct nose-to-nose contact, but that opportunity is there just through the environment. Jesus. So it's a potential for a huge long-term problem. It's not going to go away anytime soon. Yeah. So what are the symptoms of that? What are they? So no symptoms at all for the first couple of years. Okay. This is also why it's never going to eliminate deer from the landscape. They can live for, 2 years or so with the disease, but when it hits that clinical stage, they can't keep weight on. That's why it's called chronic wasting disease. They kind of shrivel up to skin and bones, heads drooping, drooling, just kind of disoriented. And eventually they'll just die. Okay, so does that cause them just to stop eating or something? I'm not sure what the internal mechanism is that causes that wasting. Yeah. It's I don't think that same wasting is seen in mad cow disease, but the same kind of disorientation and that stuff is there because it's eating away their brain pretty much. That's a terrifying prospect. Yep. And you're saying it's getting worse throughout the prairies. Yeah, and it's spreading quite a lot from where when I started my master's degree, we had I don't know, maybe there were 5 positive cases in Alberta, and that was just barely over 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now it's a few hundred new ones a year, and it's expanding.
Oof. So it's only just recently gotten into Alberta then.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't historically here.
Not as far as we know.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure surveillance was lower way back when.
Yeah.
It first started out in northern Colorado and southern Wyoming, and then it was mostly through the game farm industry that infected animals got moved around from place to place. I think the first case in Canada was in the 70s at the Toronto Zoo, but it was this captive animal. It was isolated.
Yeah.
But the first wild case was in Saskatchewan, and they started moving across the border from there.
It's always people letting things go that they shouldn't be letting go. Hey?
Or it was just, fence broken, nose-to-nose contact through the fence line of a game farm.
Right.
The problem it comes down to, having all these animals in a confined area, and if a disease gets in, it's going to spread really easily within that fenced area, and then there's higher potential for it to leak out.
Crazy.
Yeah.
We're getting off on a tangent.
Yeah, that'll happen.
I find it's interesting because I don't know anything about it. It's just such a mysterious disease as far as, because there's lots of places where there's a mandatory, you have to bring the head in, right? Yeah, and stuff like that. But anyways. Okay, so we should talk about the backcountry hunters and anglers.
Yeah, there we go.
So what's your position with backcountry hunters?
I'm on the board and the treasurer, so I get to push numbers around Excel sheets for a while, just like in my day job.
Yeah.
So, hey, I mean, our board is there's not really defined roles yet. We've only been around for a little over a year. So we there's about 11 or 12 board members, and we kind of take whatever issue is of interest to us and we have experience with and can kind of run with it.
Gotcha.
So there's no defined roles like you're the fishing guy, you're the mountain guy, it's just whatever is interested to you, we'll work together on.
Cool.
And then, I've got the additional responsibilities of dealing with the money.
Okay. So it's just been over a year. So you guys are just kind of getting this ball rolling.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you guys get support? Because Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is like a pretty big organization, right? Like it's started in the United States.
That's right.
And worked its way up into Canada.
Yeah. So, it's been around for over a decade in the U.S., headquartered out of Montana. British Columbia was the first Canadian chapter in, I want to say 2014.
Okay.
And then, about this time last year, maybe earlier, late winter, early spring, what year is it? 2017. Anyone who was a member in Alberta got an email from the folks at HQ in Montana saying, hey, we want to start an Alberta chapter. There's enough members here. Are you guys interested? So let's do this.
Nice.
So they support us with, logistics and, email infrastructure, website, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual, like our sort of, political or advocacy activity, it's all purely developed, just from the people, the members and board in Alberta.
So what's your guys' purpose? Like what was the purpose for starting this chapter?
Yeah. So the focus is on, hunting access and then conservation of, especially, as in the backcountry, right? Large wild places.
Right.
That's really the focus.
Yeah.
We've got very different issues here on our public lands than in the U.S. There's some similar, with, industrial development, things like that. But public land is managed very, very differently in Canada than the U.S. So none of their issues really translate over to our issues.
Right.
But those really are our focuses, ensuring when there's access for hunters to these areas, making sure they're managed for, long-term wildlife persistence.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Cool. And, so you got into it obviously just over a year ago. What's some of the current stuff that you guys are trying to work in? Obviously you're just getting started. But
we've already stuck our nose in a few issues. So the first one that came up just happened to be around the same time as that we formed as a chapter was the designation of the Castle area in southwest Alberta into the wildland and provincial parks.
Right.
Which a lot of, hunters were opposed to, mostly I think for the removal of OHVs, off-highway vehicles.
Yeah.
From the area. So BHA was, I think, one of the only ones that came out supporting it pretty much for the same reason that it was nice to see, an emphasis on foot access hunting, which is really kind of our bread and butter.
Yeah.
In the wildland park, especially the provincial park, we were a little less certain on. Typically hunting is not allowed in provincial parks.
Yeah.
They made an exception for the castle, and the other exception is Cypress Hills in the southeast part of the province.
Right.
And so it remains to be seen how long that's going to stick around for. The designation of parks had already happened before we actually formed as a chapter. So,
right.
If we had, if they had asked us beforehand, we would have said, yeah, wildland park all the way. That's kind of, if we had to pick one, protected designation, It would be a wildland park because it,
so what changed in there? Do you know? I know you're not.
The main issues, the main things are reduction of industrial development. So logging would be the biggest industry to kind of lose the ability to go in and cut down trees.
Yeah.
And then increasing the level of management of recreation, mainly being reduction of motorized vehicle use.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a tough one in Alberta because like most of the hunters and anglers, like hunters specifically in Alberta, but even anglers for like ice fishing and stuff like that, pretty much everybody has like an OHV or an ATV to hunt, right?
Yeah,
like
I mean it's totally legitimate, right? It's not we're not saying no one should ever be driving a quad in any of these places ever. It's been everything everywhere. Trail proliferation is a huge problem. Most of the OHV groups would agree with that, and it's a matter of finding the right balance and accepting that there needs to be a reduction relative to today if we want to be managing for clean water, fish, wildlife. And we need to plan it out better. Like right now, there's no plan in most of these places. Mm-hmm. Speaking of plans, another issue we commented on recently was the footprint and recreation plans that came out for the Porcupine Hills, Livingston area, also Southwest Alberta and the Upper Oldman area. And that was about a month ago, I want to say. So after some very long consultations, we had a couple of our board members involved in those consultations with the government and all the other recreational user groups. Came out with these very comprehensive plans with, very hard limits. There will be no more than, I think it was 0.6 kilometers per kilometer squared of motorized vehicles with motorized vehicle trails within this area. And those limits were based on, the best available scientific evidence. And that's what we want. We want to be focusing on the recreation that is compatible with levels of recreation and intensities of recreation that are compatible with long-term wildlife persistence. And they, went on them with scientifically based, based on the best available information. We've got a lot of information on the relative impacts of all these different activities. And so let's go ahead and make a proper management plan and stick with it. And then the Porcupine Livingston area, they did that, and we thought that was great. Like, let's have more of these, really well thought out, well consulted plans that, try to have a little bit of something for everyone, but with the main, an eye to making sure that the wildlife and the land and the water is healthy, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's a crazy issue in a lot of areas. Like, there's the Bighorn backcountry too, as well, right? And I think a lot of people understand that, we want to, especially people that don't have really kind of a horse in that race, like maybe people that don't go out to those areas, they'll be like, oh yeah, we should conserve water and protect animals and protect trees and this and that and the other thing, right? And that's all very kind of obvious, right?
Yeah.
But then it gets to a point where people get worried about their livelihoods, and it gets to all this kind of craziness, right? Mm-hmm. And the management thing, I think you're right. Like, I think we need to manage these sensitive areas, because the eastern slopes of Alberta, those are very sensitive and unique areas to our province. And it's not like we're up in the, in the lower foothills or the boreal in northern Alberta, where there's a lot of the same type of stuff. The eastern slopes, it's very limited, and there's only a specific number of those types of areas, and their habitat to very specific rare species in this province. So they need to have special consideration in one way or the other, right? And being scientific based, I think, is the biggest thing, where instead of acting on emotion, and I don't think that's the case anymore, but I think that it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it. Like, people, you know what I mean? People are resistant to change.
Oh, totally.
Right? So it's, when you tell people that they can't drive their ATV, or they used to drive their ATV, it causes a huge problem, right? But I think as a population, we'll change, right? We'll change our habits towards hunting and angling, and start doing, like what you're saying, foot access, right? Like, you just have to start walking places.
Yeah.
And it will preserve those areas, but also, you also get into the argument of access too, right? Like, there's people with disabilities, there's older people that don't have that capacity to do that kind of stuff, and they want to see these places too, right? So it gets really, really emotional and hard to quantify what the right thing to do is, right?
For sure. Yeah, no, it's from where I heard this, someone said, I never want to hear the phrase, there's no simple solutions. I know there's no simple solutions. If there were, we would have done it already. Of course, these are complicated issues. There's all kinds of things you're absolutely right. Yeah. But for me, at the end of the day, it comes down to, these are the places where, cutthroat trout, bull trout live. They don't live in a lot of other places. This is where our water comes from. Like, the water in my coffee right now came from the Bighorn area. That's where that water flows all the way to the North Saskatchewan, right through downtown Edmonton. Those are some pretty important values. And I'm not saying that, forestry development and, unlimited recreational access, those are values too. And it's about finding the right balance. And, 50 years ago when Alberta's population was half the size, less, I don't have a population graph. You could do that when there wasn't, when there weren't this huge number of, really powerful motorized vehicles. You can have, one of those is probably the same as how many people is that the same as? Is it can you compare? It's just, man, by virtue of the new technology, the increase in population, there are limits to what the environment can sustain. And I think in a lot of places we're past those limits, and now we've got to kind of dial it back. And yeah, as you say, it's hard. People are resistant to change. People have gotten used to a certain way of doing things, and we've got to kind of stop, slow down, look at the big picture about, well, what do we want to have Alberta look like in 50 years from now?
Well, two things that you just kind of jogged my memory on was, like, you're talking about the technology change for ATVs and stuff. Yeah. I can speak to that personally. Growing up, after school, I came home, got off the bus, and jumped on the quad and went for a rip. Like, that's what I did. That's all. I did that for like 4 or 5 years straight, right? And I loved it. It was awesome. But I had a Honda, 300 two-wheel drive that I could get anywhere with it. It was fine. Like, all the mud holes none of them were rutted up that bad. They weren't, like, you know what I mean? It wasn't that hard. And as time went on, by the time I was in I was an adult, in my 20s and stuff, that quad could not go anywhere. Like, it literally did not have the ability to go anywhere anymore, because everybody's got, like, a 1000cc quad, and it's jacked up with big mud tires, and every mud hole is that much deeper and that much dug up, and there's that much degradation of the landscape, and it's just, and you're right. And we didn't need to do that, but ego won't let us not have more power, right? Like, it's totally. That's what we want.
Oh yeah. I mean, those guys are in the market, in the business of selling more quads, talking about technology. It's not limited to that activity. Hunting. Look at all the new technologies coming along with hunting. And every time something else comes along, drones, got to develop regulations to roll it back if we don't want to, if we want to maintain fair chase. Cause if you're scouting with a drone with like an infrared camera on, there's kind of, it's limitless, the possibilities. And, it's always, there's a spectrum, right? I mean, I go to the store and buy an elk call. Not that I've ever shot an elk with one. But, someone else makes this elk call for me, and there's, that's one kind of technology. You can have ones where you squeeze the bulb and it makes a perfect cow call. Hey, like, that's not me. That's the manufacturer, all the way up to, drones and all kinds of other, gadgets, it goes and doohickeys, right? It's never ending. The technological advancement to try to sell you something you think you need to enjoy recreation. And, part of what we're trying to do is say, maybe you don't need all those things. Maybe you don't need the quad, fancy, everything.
I mean, we have so much vast area. If I think about, like, where I grew up hunting was in central Alberta, up by Slave Lake and stuff like that. And we have so much vast area. Like, I can go 100 kilometers from my parents' house where I grew up. I could literally walk out the back door and go like 130 kilometers south before I run into anything developed besides like pipelines and stuff, right? And the idea of somebody needing to walk back in there is really hard for them to quantify, right? But but like, you look at places like the States where they're wilderness areas, that's all it is. It's just, I don't even know if they have equestrian access in a lot of those places.
I'm not sure.
I think some of them you can take llamas and stuff, but like, it's mostly foot access, and that does preserve, it keeps it the way it used to be, right? But yeah, it's a fascinating, What was the other thing? I said two things, and then I forgot the second thing. We were talking about quads, we were talking about
technology.
I forget.
What else? All right.
Whatever. Moving on. But yeah, I think it's an uphill battle to try and, but like, I think you're probably right for the eastern slopes portion to probably want to remove ATVs as much as you can. Or at least
reduce.
Like, that's a conversation.
It needs to be, again, scientifically, it's a scientifically determined limit on trail density that can, before you start really seeing impacts to water quality and fish survival and things like that. Those are a really big impact.
Concentrated into one area where you have the bridges.
Is it, do you want to have a small area that's sort of like an ATV is allowed zone, and another place where it's not? Do you want to have low density everywhere? Those are the kind of decisions that have to be made at the management table. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that's pretty much kind of how it went with the Porcupine Livingston area, that there's actually, there's a map now with this line here. You can't see I'm drawing with my fingers. Podcast. These are the trails here that'll be motorized. These are the ones that won't be. And let's actually sit down and figure out a plan that works and, maintains reasonable access and has, reasonable opportunities for different kinds of activities, but things that are compatible with the fish and the wildlife. And that's for BHA. That's really what it all comes down to. Is that's always our guiding light. Is what is going to be, what is going to treat the land and the water with the respect that it needs to, continue to provide these opportunities into the future. I'll give you one more example of an issue we got involved in. The North Central Native Trout Plan, which is a proposed plan to close down some of the trout rivers in the north central eastern slopes area to recreational angling, with the idea that while these fish populations are decreasing and we've got to do something, so let's shut down recreational fishing for 5 years and then reevaluate.
Yeah.
And we said no. I mean, we're okay with that if it's part of a larger plan that actually addresses the root issue, which is low water quality because of sedimentation, whether that's because of recreational access, too many trails, and industrial development like logging. Those are the underlying issues that are leading to sedimentation and siltation in the water and decreasing those trout populations. If you address that, we'll be happy to keep ourselves off those rivers for a few years while things recover. But just trying to push out the recreational users without addressing the root of the problem it's not going to solve the problem. Yeah. So again, whatever the issue is it dealing with the habitat? Is it dealing with making sure it can sustain those fish and wildlife populations? If it is, we'll probably support it. If it's not, we're not going to. Yeah. And that's kind of not that everything is a black and white issue, but that's kind of where the decision making comes for us. Especially something that helps the fish and the wildlife in their habitat. Yeah.
Well, especially if they just want to shut down recreational use for 5 years, you're like, okay, what does that mean really? Because they could just make that not 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Year 4.5 comes, well, fish numbers aren't up, better extend it for 5 more years. Right. Well, again, you haven't dealt with the problem. Let's deal with the problem. And when we'll be happy to be partners on that. And if that means not fishing those streams for a while, that's okay. As long as we've also dealt with the problem at the same time.
Well, there was an interesting stat that Britt Schmidt gave me from the ACA regarding, it was after we recorded the podcast, regarding angler numbers in Alberta relative to other provinces. And it's insane. It's ridiculous. Compared to the number of lakes, because you look at Ontario, we've got something like 800,000 lakes. And you've got 0.9 anglers per lake because of that, right? And you look at, I think Manitoba was something similar. It was 2 anglers per lake with 100,000 lakes. Yeah. We've got 800 fish-bearing water bodies and 312 anglers per water body. It's what the hell?
I've seen those numbers too. Yeah, it's no contest. I got to say. I mean, mountains are great, but I do miss the lakes of Ontario that I grew up on.
Yeah, well, and I think people lose sight of that. I talk to my friends and stuff talking about angling, and they start whining about the government being shitty at management and not being able to manage the fish populations properly, and saying it's their fault for not managing it properly. And it's well, also the anglers are the one who removed them, right? And there's 312 of us per water body. And it's that, you're right. The management needs to be better, but they don't have infinite funds to keep permanent population numbers and know exactly what's going on all the time. They do testing, right? And we also have to understand and those same people will tell me that, well, I should be able to fish and remove what I historically fished and removed. It's well, that's not true, because we're getting more and more anglers every year, and therefore we're getting more and more fish being removed every year, and because of that, it gets diluted. And it's just totally. It's hard for. I think it's really easy to blame the government and say that they screwed it up.
It's always easy to blame someone else, right? Especially the government.
And it's really hard for people to look inward and be like, "Oh, right, I'm the one who's been, removing that extra fish that I'm not supposed to be removing, or I'm the one who's been maybe you weren't doing anything wrong, but
it's just math. Yeah, if you've got tenfold the number of hunters per lake, there's going to be impact. It's just there's no way around that. It's a much more difficult problem to manage when you've got essentially an infinite number of lakes like Ontario and Manitoba does. It's just
insane. 312 anglers per lake.
That's unreal.
It's ridiculous. It's okay, well, now what?
Yeah, good luck fighting any government that can manage that. That's a kind of intractable-ish problem. There's just too many people for the number of lakes we have here.
Yeah, there's not the money. There's not enough money going towards them or that's being given to that portion of the government to try and manage it the way we'd like to. I mean, look at fish and wildlife officers in this province. We don't have what do we have? I can't remember what the number is, but it's
surprisingly low when you see the number. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not even close to being enough, especially when you talk about trying to reduce, reduce access, like, or ATV access and unauthorized use of trails and stuff like that in places like the eastern slopes, right?
Yeah.
They don't have the manpower to do it. So it's tough. So that's part of the problem. But anyways,
I mean, yeah, it all comes down to the same thing. There's lots of people wanting to do lots of stuff in lots of places, and it's a really difficult thing to manage. Again, no simple solutions.
We've gone through so many different things. My brain is going a million miles a minute. I'm like, we could do like an hour on like every 10 minutes that we've had here, we could turn into an hour if we needed to. But, you touched on something earlier. You're talking about fair chase.
Yeah.
So it's funny, the fair chase thing, like I had never heard that phrase until the last few years, probably 4 or 5 years. I heard that phrase, and in my mind, what the hell is fair chase?
Yeah.
Right. And then I started getting into it and started, oh, okay, I understand. And realizing, but like in my mind, fair chase, like that's what hunting was, right? And I'm like, you go out and you figure out, you pattern animals and you learn what they're doing. You spend time with them and you don't, and like the idea of like paying somebody to hunt on their farm, like to hunt on their deer farm or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And like pick out an animal is like, that was never hunting to me. That's
a whole other issue. But
but fair chase, like it's an interesting concept. And maybe you want to explain what that means.
It's a very mushy concept. So I think there's probably reasonable agreement on what it means. The actual specifics, people are going to disagree. What it means, at least my interpretation, is it gives the animal should have a fair opportunity to detect you and get the hell out of there and not get shot.
Right.
So, foot access bow hunting, you got to get 30, 40 yards from an animal. It's got a chance to detect you and get out of there. Using a drone to find an animal and then, sniping it from 600 yards away with a high-powered rifle, that's not really fair chase. And then everything in between those two extremes, that's where the real discussion comes in. And, what isn't fair chase is always going to be kind of a personal thing. I know I was talking about technology before, and somewhere in that technology spectrum from, a stick you sharpen with your bare hands to, a rifle and everything, all the other things that go along with it, gear, buying, synthetic doe, estrus doe ear, and all those kinds of things. Like somewhere along there, it makes it so that the animal has too small of a chance to detect you, or maybe with doe urine, maybe it sort of short circuits the animal's brain, and it can't. It's just the buck is just so tuned into that he's not ever he's gonna ignore all other warning signs. And at some point it becomes not quite fair to the animal. And people are always going to give you a hard time saying, well, you have a gun. Of course it's not fair. Like, well, okay, but
that's the point, right?
For me, it's not about it's less about the weapon than about the method of hunting and how you get to within range to actually pull the trigger or release the arrow.
And this is where it's interesting, right?
And it's, right in there, and that there's because every pain's going to be different.
Yeah, because this is where it gets about feelings, right? It's about emotions and the way you feel about something. It's not necessarily ethicality, because if you wanted the most ethical and moral, like quick death, you'd be like, use a rifle, practice all the time, and kill it from 300 yards away or 100 yards away, and that's technically the most ethical way to do it, right?
Sure.
And then talk about bow hunting, like you look at I would argue the stats on bow hunting, there's probably more wound loss than there is clean kills, because a lot of people like pick up a bow, think they're good to go and I can go shoot something now, and they don't do any practicing or not enough, and they, you know what I mean? Like, I can hit a pie plate at 20 yards, I'm good. You're like, that's not even remotely close to being good enough.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because I feel like personally, the last few years, I've done a lot more bow hunting than I have rifle hunting, because what I've realized is it's made me a tenfold better hunter.
Yeah.
Because I have to get, like you said, I have to get within 30 yards of them, right? Like the number of elk that I could have killed with a rifle the last 3 years that I didn't, because I wasn't close enough. I was 50 yards away where I wanted to be 30 yards away, and they weren't facing me. They're facing me, they weren't broadside, or like stuff like that, right? I could have killed an elk every year, but I haven't.
Yeah,
because
you had a bow, not a rifle.
And it sucks. I would have loved to have had that meat, because that's the majority of what I consume. My family consumes, but it's also, I really learned like so much more by being that close to them and watching them interact with one another and trying to, and like the closeness you feel with nature and with those animals is so far beyond what you can get from 100 or 200 or 300 yards away.
For sure.
But
yeah, no, you raised a good point though about sort of this kind of, for me, there's sort of two different ethical dimensions, I guess. There's the chase and then the kill. So yeah, with the kill, you're right. Having, you want a clean one shot, one arrow, fast, humane death for the animal.
Arguably, you don't want the animal not to know that you were ever there.
Not exactly.
Yeah.
So for that part, yeah, a rifle's probably better than an arrow for that reason, in terms of wounding loss and all that kind of stuff. But then the actual chase is, having to be able to get that close to get into bow range, requires a whole, higher set of skills than being able to get within 100 yards of an animal for a rifle. So yeah, there's different aspects to that, and they kind of are in conflict sometimes, whereas, the low technology, arrow versus the high technology rifle on one end, and then, trying to get close enough and be undetectable to get so close to the animal to use that lower technology arrow, requires sort of a more fair chase approach than maybe getting within a couple 100 yards for a rifle. And it's an infinite conversation. You can talk about it forever. I'd love to talk about it forever, but,
but yeah, I struggle trying to explain that to people all the time, right? Because it's like, oh, you bow hunt. Like, wouldn't it be like more ethical to rifle hunt? And I'm thinking, well, depends.
Like when you pull the trigger, maybe it would be, but up to that point, you're giving the animal every opportunity to get away from you when you're trying to get 30 yards from it.
And, but even that is an interesting concept. The idea of like, why do we need to give the animal an opportunity to get away, right? Like we're clearly the smarter being, right? They're more well adapted for their where they are. And why would we not use all of our technology to our advantage? But I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? And for me, the answer is because it takes away from the experience.
Yeah.
Right? Like
I think that's part of it. And that's part of it's just the whole shooting fish in a barrel thing. Like if it's too easy, one, there's the personal achievement factor that's just, not there to the same level. And then two is if it becomes that much easier to shoot every deer and 100 success goes to 99%, then our opportunities will go way down. I'm happy, not getting an animal every year because I just can't find one or I can't get close enough. Yeah. If that means that, you'll be able to go hunting every year to get a tag.
Exactly.
Yeah, like with fishing, 312 anglers per lake. If every hunter is punching their tag every single year, then maybe whitetails won't be over the counter. Maybe they'll be on draw too. If that was, so that's a much longer term thing. If we ever get to that level, but I think the restraint of methods is a big part of what allows that continued hunting opportunity for so many people.
No, I agree. No, for sure. It's. Yeah, and you're right. Like there's some areas we're seeing in this province now where they're removing supplemental tags. Where people don't know what that means. It means you get a general whitetail tag, and then you can get 1 or 2 supplemental whitetail doe tags, and they're removing some of those. And I was all for that because I feel like you can remove people shooting those extra 2 does. That's drastically helping out the population, allowing them to rear and to raise. Fawns and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to see a boom in population, I would think. But yeah, I think you're right. Like it seems like even in my lifetime, in my experience, it seems like moose and deer populations are declining. It seems that way. I don't know if that's true or not, but like it seems like they're around less. Like I remember, and this is totally circumstantial. This is not evidence really at all, right? But I remember for 10 years ago, when I would drive from Slave Lake to Edmonton, it was common to see 100 to 350 deer in the fields and stuff driving through. Mm-hmm. I'm lucky to see 2 or 3 now, right? Yeah. And that's circumstantial evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? Yeah. It could be a low spot in the population and whatever, right? Who knows? But it is concerning. It does raise the question of will those animals be there in perpetuity in the future for future generations to hunt, right? And I think we can all agree that we want those animals around for people to be able to experience that for a multitude of reasons. But yeah, it's, the management, people get so upset with the management thinking that they're screwing up the management. Like, I can't hunt there because the government says that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not enough, right? But like, I see moose there all the time, but that's very circumstantial. Like, maybe you found the one pocket where there's 12 moose and the rest of the unit has none, right? So it's really hard to explain that to somebody who has the experience in quotes.
Yeah.
Right. Like
totally
the experience.
Yeah, everyone's got their own anecdotal evidence of whether there are or aren't animals there. And, you know, we had, BHA had an event just on Monday this week. We had our members in Edmonton. We had a presentation from one of the wildlife biologists just out of Spruce Grove, talking about, among other things, how they set harvest quotas and,
right.
you know, whether there be supplemental tags, whether they should increase the number of moose tags in unit X or decrease them in unit Y, and what evidence goes into it. And, you know, ideally it's, you know, aerial surveys that give you a really unbiased estimate of the number of animals and then the trend over time if you see an increase or a decrease. But the reality is they don't have the budget to fly every unit every year. Far from that. You know, maybe once every 10 years each unit will get covered, if that.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have the aerial surveys, then what do you do? And okay, so hunter harvest reports are a good way.
Yeah.
If the same number of animals are getting killed, but it takes twice as long, it takes, you know, twice as many hunter days to achieve that same level of animals getting harvested.
Yeah.
That tells you something about how many animals are there.
Yeah.
And those are really good sets of data. And then it gets down into, the anecdotal stuff. Some landowner calls him up and tells him there's elk eating his crops, or there's, you know, there's no deer around this year. So those pieces of information might alert them to there being a problem, but then they've really got to go and look at kind of the hard numbers that are more unbiased than what you saw driving down the road. Cause, you know, there's so many ways that can mislead you, right?
Oh,
so,
huge.
it was a really interesting presentation to see what goes into it and how they factor in those harvest surveys.
I wonder, they must do ground truthing for those aerial surveys, hey? Like they must have like some kind of algorithm, because obviously they're not going to see everything, right?
Yeah, there's different ways of doing aerial surveys. There's sort of random block versus distance sampling. They fly a subset of the area. There's methods to sort of figure out, they can stratify it by habitat quality and figure there'll be, you know, higher numbers and high quality versus, you know, lower numbers and lower quality, obviously. And they fly a random subset of each of those blocks, and then figure out what the,
I wonder what the while they're flying though, like how much they miss. I would argue they probably miss a large.
So there's ways to actually, to quantify that.
Yeah.
So again, going back to my master's degree, I worked on that specific thing.
Oh, okay.
So, so with aerial surveys or any kind of survey, there's this detectability animal issue. So is the animal there? And if it's there, will you see it? What's the probability you will see an animal if it is there? And then what factors influence whether or not you see it? So with deer, group size, if the animal's moving, the light, the snow conditions are a huge factor. So what we did, and it's a fairly well established method, is you eliminate the first part of that, is the animal there, by having radio collared animals that you're looking for. So you know they're there somewhere.
Right.
So we get a fixed wing aircraft, to locate the collared animal.
Right.
They figure out its location and they radio the coordinates of a randomly offset, like 1 or 2 mile square block.
Okay.
The animal's somewhere in this block, you don't know where. They radio that coordinates to a helicopter, which is right behind them. The helicopter has, you know, the pilot, the navigator, and 2 observers in the back. And that's kind of standard aerial survey protocol for the government of Alberta. The helicopter then flies that block using the same survey methods they would normally do. And if you see the animal, you say, okay, it was in a group of, 5 animals. They were running from the helicopter, whatever. If you didn't see it, you then turn on your telemetry receiver, go find that animal and say, oh, it was bedded down in the trees by itself with with one other animal. And then you can do these statistical methods to say, what are the factors that led to you either seeing or not seeing the animal?
Right.
So you can kind of get that, actually quantify the number of animals you missed, because you know if your animal was there or not, because it's wearing a collar that beeps at you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I see. Okay. That makes sense.
And there's different ways now. There's the distance sampling. You fly a transect, just a straight line, and then you measure how far off the line you saw the animal, with the idea that you'll see everything right under the aircraft.
Yeah.
But 200 yards out on either side, you're probably going to miss more animals. And then there's statistical methods to kind of make up that difference between what you saw and what's actually there.
Okay. So the testing with the collar, that's the way that they ground truth the data.
Yeah. It's if you missed an animal, if it's wearing a collar, because it was there and you either saw it or you didn't see it.
That's what I was always curious about, is whether or not, for me, I thought that maybe it was the hunter harvest reports that they were using as that. I'm sure that goes into it probably, but, Yeah, like you said, they don't have the money to do it every year. So
No.
like
They're expensive, man.
in 10 years
Helicopters,
time,
$1,000 an hour at least. It's plus staff time, plus they're not cheap.
No, not at all, for sure. But yeah, it's interesting it makes sense, I guess. I mean, you'll have people that'll argue that that's not a real world number, but it's like, well, what better?
What else is going to be better? That's it. And even though there's a confidence interval, let's say there's 1,000 deer plus or minus 20%, whatever it ends up being. So they never know what the hard number is, but you can see that confidence interval, it's somewhere within that. In that sweet spot. And then if you repeat the same survey 5 years later, how much has that shifted? Is there a detectable change from one survey to the next?
Yeah.
And then in between surveys, you can look at hunter harvest data or other supplemental information and say,
Gotcha.
Does that track with what we saw in the aerial surveys? Yes or no? If not, maybe we should, pay closer attention or fly this area again if there's some issues flagged.
Okay.
But you got to be creative and you've got to, sort of duct tape all your different data sources together into some meaningful way to give you an answer. And it's not easy.
Yeah. And it's easy for people to, say that that's not sufficient, right? It's easy for people to say that that's not going to work. I can tell you that you're missing this many animals and I can tell you this and that and everything, right? But it's at the end of the day, that's the scientific method, and that's what we've decided is the way we're going to go with this. Because again, we don't have infinite funding to make sure that this is done properly, or more accurately, right? But it makes sense. It makes sense. So that's how they sort out like tag numbers and stuff like that too, is based off of the change from time to time. Yeah,
they'll see how the numbers change and how the hunter surveys, if they show like a really big. So they were talking about one of the moose harvest from one unit. They were saying they saw this really, really. Yeah, same number of animals every year, but the catch per unit effort is kind of how they quantify it. It took twice as many or 3 times as many hunter days before they actually harvested those animals. So there's something going on there. It's not the population is not as high as it was in year one. So you kind of use that to flag issues and then go and fly to confirm kind of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah. Moose is a big issue right now. There's a lot of units. It seems like they're shutting down they're closing down or they're making it harder to get a tag right now because it seems like they're having a rough time for reason X or Y or whatever. But on a more basic level, I guess, what do you think that like getting into hunting and angling has done for you, like as in your life? Do you think it's brought more of whatever? Like, do you think it's like what I'm trying to say is, why should people that don't hunt and don't fish be supportive of hunting and fishing, right?
Yeah. I think people should be supportive or neutral because it's a sustainable activity.
Yeah.
There are, lots of different outdoor recreation activities. Some are more sustainable than others. Foot access hunting is near the top of the list for sustainable, along with, no trace canoeing, hiking, things like that.
Yeah.
Again, it comes down to that disconnect between the individual conservation of the individual animal and conservation of the herd.
Yeah.
And it is totally aligned with the conservation of the population. Hunting brings in tons of money from tag sales that support conservation. It's such a lockdown management system with the number of tags that are given out that it's not going to have any negative impacts on populations. And if it does, it's really easy to turn that dial down and decrease the number of tags. It's the easiest management lever in the book. It's dead easy. There's less tags this year until populations recover.
Yeah.
So that's part of it, is that it does no harm, I think, for the most part, if it's done right. Which typically, North America has a really long tradition of responsible wildlife management using hunting. So that's a big part of it. For me, it's sort of as we talked about at the start, it's deepened my appreciation of all the different critters out there in the woods, not just the deer that I'm looking for, but all the other things that come along.
Yeah.
So I think it's, again, sort of deepened that, relationship or connection with nature. It's improved my cooking a lot. I'm always trying new recipes. I really, that's every time if I'm taking the life of that animal, I want to be damn sure I'm using it the best, most respectful possible way. So I never cook fancier dinners than when I'm cooking deer or elk or moose or whatever it is.
And you definitely appreciate, where it's coming from.
Yeah.
You know what you had to go through, what that animal had to go through for it to be on your plate.
Totally.
And
I want to do right by it.
Find me a hunter that throws away meat.
Yeah.
Like, You know what I mean? Unless it's been spoiled somehow,
Yeah.
like by improper handling or something. Like I don't know any hunters that cooks a meal that they've harvested and then, like, oh, like we're not going to eat the other half, just throw it away.
Yeah.
It's like nobody does that
No.
because it's like you're connected to that now,
Yeah.
right? Whereas you look at people that buy stuff at the grocery store and they'll throw like the number in the States, I think, was like 40% of what food that people buy is wasted, is thrown in the garbage, right? It's like, that's deplorable. That's disgusting.
Totally.
You'll never see a hunter do that because we have a full understanding connection to that.
I carried those 50 pounds out of my back. Damn right, we're not going to waste any of it.
Well, and there's emotion involved in it too,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a very, I don't think people understand the appreciation of that the hunters have for the natural world, right? Like it's so easy for them to look at Bambi and go like, look at those evil ass hunters.
Oh,
that
totally.
Are, shoot Bambi's dad or whatever it was, or mom or whatever it was. And that kind of stuff, that's where people get carried away with it, right? They think that we're a bunch of assholes driving around drinking beer and shooting animals, right? And it's like, that's not what this is.
Yeah, I only drink beer after I shot the animal.
Yeah, it's after.
I agree with you completely. I mean, Bambi is one source of that kind of bad perception. The other is a lot of hunting media, like Duck Dynasty, all those kinds of things that sort of glorify that.
Bringing it back.
And there's some examples of really, really good hunting media in pop culture. Steve Rinella, Meat Eater, Randy Newberg. There's a few of them out there that do a great, phenomenal job of explaining the kind of natural history, the ecology, all the wildlife management science, the history of that. And they're great. And, half the time on those shows, they don't actually shoot. They don't get an animal to shoot. And it's fine. It's still a really good episode to watch. When I watch those or listen to Steve Rinnella's podcast, I learn so much. He chats with, wildlife biologists from all over, ranch managers, environmental historians, like the whole deal. It's great. You learn so much about it. And it really puts hunting in a very different light than what most people, normally get to see on the news. And that's, goes for me too, right? When I grew up in the city, I didn't hunt. I didn't know anyone who hunted. I didn't have a great idea of a great perception of hunters. And, once I met a few and learned a little bit more about it, I was like, oh, okay, that's not what I had previously been exposed to. This kind of changes everything.
It's ridiculous. Like I have friends who I grew up with my entire life who they thought it was such a stupid pursuit that was just like lazy and easy and you know what I mean? And they're like, why would you do that? That's so dumb, right? And then I take them out and they go, oh, this is 100% not what I thought it was, right? And it's really hard but like you were saying with Meat Eater, I think the Meat Eater podcast is actually one of the podcasts that convinced me to wanting to do this. Yeah. And I mean, I've taken more of a forest management perspective on it, but I want to start bringing in more. But the stuff that they talk about on Meat Eater is I will never have that knowledge. That is a knowledge that is so far beyond me. Yeah. And I bow down to them for
those
understanding
guys
that.
Put a few more days in the field each year than I'm able to.
A few more, yeah.
Just a few.
Yeah, Stephen Rinella, I think, is the best advocate for sustainable animal management that I've ever come across. He understands all of the issues, and he's so well versed in the history and understanding all of the concepts that are going into it, and he nails it. Yeah. The Meat Eater podcast and the TV show too, like you said, they show hunting the way it really is. Most of the time, you're not shooting stuff. Yeah. Most of the time, you're missing opportunities.
I'm taking my rifle for a walk. Yeah, that's what it usually is for me.
And but like you said, there's plenty of episodes where they don't do anything. They don't get anything. Yeah. But you get to see beautiful landscapes. You get to see a bunch of animals that they're glassing through their binoculars and stuff like that. And no, I love that podcast. It's the bomb. Yeah, that's why I want to start getting into that kind of stuff because it's interesting, right? It's super fascinating the type of people that he has on there. But yeah, the hunting and angling, trying to quantify it for people that don't understand it is really, really tough. It's personally for me, I would argue that it's made me a more thoughtful and understanding person just in general because it allows me to understand that there's a process behind everything that we do in life that most people don't understand, right? They see the end result and they don't see where it comes from, and people make assumptions, right? And I think that's true of most things, right? So I think it's made me more appreciative of course, the natural world, not just fish and game, but also the insects and the plants and the water and all that kind of stuff, because you realize it's all interconnected. And I think the benefit that having people hunting and angling and recreating on the landscape, that I think is probably the most important one, at least I would think, for future generations and stuff, is that it gets people interested in those subjects, right? For example, the BHA is trying to make sure that ultimately that these resources exist for future generations to enjoy, right?
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to get people out there doing the things, enjoying the place. Whereas people that don't tend to do that, they tend to stay in the city or in the town and they don't really get out there. Sure, they have an inherent kind of appreciation. They kind of, like, oh yeah, forests are pretty. I like that kind of stuff. But like, they're not going out of their way to give their money to try and support the continued efforts and conservation and existence of these areas, of these resources, right?
Yeah, you can't have that really, really focused place-based connection if you've never been there. And you know, now I go to a place where I hunt, and I remember what that tree looks like and what that trail looks like, and like, it's crazy how hardwired it is into our brains to be able to recognize those things and feel that connection to those places. And you got to get people out there, otherwise they're not going to have that personal relationship and personal connection that makes them want to manage those areas for the long term.
Oh, absolutely. I think myself being a forester, I can remember the forbs and the grasses and the species that were like around the animal, where like you know what I mean? Like I'm remembering exactly all of it because I know the names and stuff, right? But you're right. Like it's etched in my memory, and it allows you to have a more complete understanding of everything. And it just, without people getting out there and hunting, fishing, and I would argue, like I made this argument when I did the podcast for the Bighorn Backcountry. I made the argument that I don't want to see a complete elimination of all ATV and OHV access in some of these areas, because that is, you are drastically reducing the number of people that get out there to experience nature then, right? Because there's a lot of people that don't hunt or fish, but they do ATV, right? And if you can get across to them that they need to be responsible and stay on the trails, and I think that allows them to enjoy it, and they pass that on to their children, which in turn helps us conserve these areas, right? So it's still a slippery slope, because you want to have as many people as possible appreciating these areas without degrading the landscape. And it's a tricky tightrope to walk. I totally agree with you. It's not about saying no quads ever. It's about where are the appropriate places for them? What kind of infrastructure do they need? What's the scientifically determined trail density that's not going to cause any damage? And it's a tricky tightrope to walk. And we've got some really good information. We've got a ton of research in a lot of these areas, through the university, government studies, etc. And let's, put that information into our best practice and evaluate as we go. And let's start somewhere with some plans, which the government started doing to their credit in the Porcupine Livingston area. Yeah. And let's see more of that really difficult grappling with these issues and bring all the stakeholders together to get a plan that's going to work for the largest number of people. And more importantly, work for the wildlife and wild places. Absolutely. And the whole ecosystem as a whole, right? Like, we want to make those places. You can't just conserve the one species. You can't manage the land just for cutthroat trout or whatever, right? Like, it's a unit that works together, right? So protecting one is protecting the other ones.
That's right. Let's manage for clean water and healthy forests and all the other things that go along with that.
Oh, for sure. It's an infinite concept. But so being somebody who's, it's kind of a last question here. I know you gotta get out of here by it's 8 to 8. Give me 5 more minutes. Sure. We'll shut her down.
No problem.
Just like one final question regarding hunting and angling and getting into it. Being someone, you said you got into it as an adult.
Yeah.
I know so many people that show interest in wanting to. Lately, I feel like it's getting more good public PR, right?
Yeah.
And people are starting to understand, okay, maybe it's more complicated than I thought, and it's part of sustainable management. And I find a lot of people that have no access to any kind of, they don't know people that hunt or fish, or like, I can only take so many of my friends out a year.
Yeah.
Like,
sure.
I've got,
so you want to get fill your own tag.
I covet my time in the bush.
Totally, and I hear you.
I want to help you. I wish I had more time. I love teaching people.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's so rewarding to see people do that, but it's also, I only have a limited number of days that I can be in the bush. So to people who don't know somebody that can take them out, and they want to start getting into this thing, like, do you have any resources or any way that maybe to help them start understanding and getting into that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And
I know.
It's kind of that's the kicker, right? So I mean, you can start with taking your Hunt Red course through AHIA. If you want to ask some questions, join our Alberta BHA's Facebook page. Just Google or on Facebook or search for Alberta Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We have pint nights every 3 months, give or take. Try to get guests in, like we had, as I said, a GOA biologist. We had just this week, a few months ago, we had a researcher on chronic wasting disease from the university come talk to our group.
Nice.
And it's just a friendly group of people, and you can, ask questions too. You don't need to be a member to come to our pint nights. We encourage you to become a member, backcountryhunters.ca. Come out to one of our events, chat with people, and everyone's willing to help out. As you said, it's not a matter it's a matter of time. That's the only issue. It's like we all love talking about hunting and helping teach other people how to do it. It's just a matter of getting out in the field is tough. But you'll probably come out and you'll meet someone. We'll find time to bring you out for a day or two, maybe not more than that at the start, but that's, enough to get your feet wet kind of thing.
For sure. It's tough because I think the biggest problem for people is they don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Right? Like
there's the regulations, the equipment. It's trying to read that regulation book without any prior knowledge is brutal.
Oh, I know. And where to go. Right?
Yeah. And that's the other huge issue. And that's a big part of what BHA is about is, public land, especially in the US where there's probably bigger threats, I would say.
Yeah.
But in Alberta too, if you're in, an area that's mostly private land, you've got to drive a couple hours to find public land, or you got to start knocking on doors and chatting with landowners. And that's, it's the toughest thing for sure is finding a place to go. Yeah,
it is. And it's funny too, because as much as you want to promote hunters and anglers, you don't want to tell people where your hunting hole is.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, where do you hunt? We're like, well,
somewhere in this general area. I hunt in wildlife management unit.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Well, it's one of those things I find, like, I think on the Meat Eater podcast, they said it really well. I forget which episode it was, but they were talking about your spot, right? So like if you have a spot that you go to and you tell your buddy about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you bring him there or something like that, right? And then he keeps showing up after, you know what I mean? After you showed him and you're like, this is my area. Like now we're both here and it's a problem. But it's one of those things where like, if you find a spot on your own, I'm not going to be angry. If I go somewhere and somebody's found a spot that I like to hunt and like, you know what I mean? That's awesome. Like that's what that is. Like that's just part of the game, right? There's only so many places you can go. But if you tell somebody like, hey, come check out this place and you bring them there and then they come back and they bring their friends.
Ooh.
And then their friends bring their friends. And then all of a sudden now the honey hole is not a honey hole, right? Cause it's totally overrun with quads there's
this whole like unspoken etiquette around
it's tough.
Sharing of hunting locations. And it's not an easy one,
but at the same time, I think there's the Alberta Outdoorsman Forum. I think is pretty good for people can like it's quite the mess of people's opinions because it is all people's opinions, right? But that being said, there is still. I find that if someone wants to know where to go fishing, like they say, "Oh, I'm in Edmonton."
Yeah.
And they can go on there. You can post like, "I like to go fishing for trout or walleye or whatever near Edmonton. Where can I go?" I find people are really, really good at saying like, "Oh, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here."
Even general areas,
right?
Just not a lot long.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be useful as well. But like again, that's a public forum where people go and explain their opinions and stuff, and so it can get a little bit hairy and dicey and not exactly scientific at times, but it's still a good place to go. And like I personally go there to look up information a lot of times, and there is good information to be found on there. But I think that's the toughest part is trying to find a place to go. That's where most people's questions are, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Once you get out there and you have a place to go, then you can start going and start learning and start paying attention. But it's finding a place to go is the hardest part.
It is. Another good resource for that is the Alberta Discovered the Guide through Alberta Conservation Association that has the list of all the conservation sites, whether it's owned by them or Ducks Unlimited or whoever. And a lot of those are close to town and some of them are pretty good. I go duck hunting at a Ducks Unlimited site not too far from Edmonton. And it's, go out for a morning before work sometimes and then show up to work smelling like duck 2 hours late.
Yeah. The ACA is the best.
So those are really great sites to get started and just to kind of get your feet wet, whether you're looking for, grouse or bunnies or something small and kind of kind of learn the lay of the land a little bit. It's a really good place to start. And another cheap plug for BHA. Yeah, just look for our Facebook group, Alberta Backcountry Hunters Anglers on Facebook. And we've got a pretty good discussion board there on different issues. And, it changes with the seasons. And I'm sure in the fall, it'll be a little bit more about big game hunting.
Right.
But yeah, there's, always good discussion, really well informed people there.
Perfect.
And,
I have to check it out. I'm actually not, I meant to come to the pint night on, was it Sunday?
Monday.
Yeah. But I was down south doing field work. But yeah, I think I'm going to start trying to come to those because it sounds really interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Nope. Yeah. So come to those events, join the Facebook page.
Yeah.
And there's lots of really knowledgeable folks there. There was, I think, they did a backpack meetup in Calgary because those high-end hunting backpacks aren't cheap. So everyone came out one day with all their different brands of backpacks that everyone else could try and figure out what they liked. And so there's all kinds of opportunities to get together with other like-minded folks and chat about this kind of stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's what you need, right? You just need to try. Like, it does take effort. You got to try to find people and find places, and like you need to start engaging in that kind of stuff. So there you go. The BHA Facebook page. That sounds a perfect place to start. So. Awesome. And yeah, like you're saying, the ACA too. The ACA is an awesome resource. The Alberta Conservation Association, like they have an infinite amount of information there. And like you said, the sites that they actually have acquired through land acquisition somehow.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
We're not at that level yet. We just yell at the government. We don't actually buy land. Our budget is not really, no.
You're a year into it. Give it some time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
awesome. So, anyways, thanks for coming on. This was
my pleasure.
Exactly what I wanted to get. I know you got to get out of here. That was a full hour, so that's perfect.
All
that's
right.
exactly what I'm looking for. So
awesome.
Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Take care.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. That was really, really good. I hope to get Tom on or someone else from the BHA on again sometime because, as you can tell, there's a million different things I want to talk about regarding hunting and angling and that kind of stuff. And it's an infinite. Like I said, there's a whole podcast about it, like the Meat Eater podcast and stuff. So I really appreciate Tom coming on. That was really, really good. I know we touched lightly on a bunch of different subjects, but I hope it was a good kind of overview of hunting and why it's important and fishing and why it's important, that kind of stuff. So thanks a lot for listening, guys. And if you want to contact me, you can email me at yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, or I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn is just Matthew Christoph, Twitter, and also you can go to the BHA Facebook page and talk to them there. Reach out to the ACA, the BHA. Good places to go to learn and to figure out where to go and start hunting, getting into hunting and angling and that kind of stuff. So, awesome. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. And we will, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Leave comments, all that good stuff. It all helps me out. If you rate and review the podcast on iTunes, that's where a lot of the rankings come. So it helps me out a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.